The text blinked on my phone with the innocuous cheer of a routine message, but the words stung more than any harsh criticism ever had. "We'll visit your sister first," Mom texted. "Her apartment is nicer." I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the screen, the polite reply forming itself even as my chest tightened with the familiar mix of disappointment and irritation. "No worries," I typed back, short, neutral, safe. Nothing to give them a hint that the words had dug into me deeper than intended. It wasn't just the apartment comment. It was everything that had led to this moment. Years of backhanded compliments, of my achievements quietly dismissed, of being compared to her in ways both subtle and cutting. She, the sister they constantly elevated, smiled for, paraded in front of relatives as the golden child, always seemed to have the spotlight, even when she didn't deserve it. And I, ever patient, ever careful to avoid making waves, had learned to swallow the sour taste of being overlooked. The text should have been ordinary, but it was loaded. I could almost hear my mother's voice behind it, that soft, approving tone that always seemed reserved for her favorite. "Her apartment is nicer." Not, "Come visit." Not, "I'm proud of your sister." But the casual judgment embedded like a needle under my skin. I sank back into the leather of my sofa, the city lights outside glinting against the glass walls of my own apartment. My penthouse. My sanctuary. I hadn't needed anyone else's validation to know the truth. I had worked for every inch of this life, every detail meticulously curated and earned. But even so, the sting remained. Because family, it was supposed to see you, to recognize the effort, not to measure you against someone else. A sigh escaped me, soft, almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of years. I swiped through old messages, remembering past conversations, where the same pattern repeated, a subtle dismissal, a tone that suggested I should be grateful just for being tolerated, a slight that no one else seemed to notice. "She's so good at everything," they would say, or "Why can't you be more like her?" And I would smile politely, nodding, even as the small voice inside me hardened. I let the silence linger, letting it wrap around me like a shield. I didn't respond to the implied challenge in the text, didn't argue, didn't defend myself. That was the first rule I had learned. Never fight on someone else's terms. Their victory was in thinking they could hurt me, in thinking I needed their approval. But I didn't. Not anymore. Instead, I closed my eyes and pictured my life in stark clarity. Every late night, every calculated risk, every moment of quiet ambition had brought me here. And I would not be diminished by a text message, a comparison, or the casual favoritism that had followed me like a shadow all my life. If anything, this little jab, "Her apartment is nicer," message was a spark. Tiny, almost laughable, but enough to ignite something far larger. I felt a slow smile curve my lips, not one of malice, but of quiet satisfaction. They wanted to measure me. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to respond. I wouldn't. Not yet. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't in shouting, in anger, in immediate retaliation. Sometimes, it's in patience. In letting life itself make the statement. In letting success speak louder than any words ever could. I leaned back, the city's skyline stretching endlessly before me. Somewhere out there, they were planning to step into my sister's, nicer, apartment and parade their approval, expecting me to care, expecting me to feel inferior. But I was already several steps ahead, already imagining a world where their assumptions would crumble without me lifting a finger. And in that quiet, simmering moment, I realized I was ready. Not for confrontation, not for explanation, but for a revelation that they would never forget. The night air was still and heavy as I settled into my usual chair by the floor, to ceiling windows. The city spread below me in a glittering tapestry of lights, indifferent yet magnificent. It was a sight I had earned, one built through countless sleepless nights, calculated risks, and unwavering dedication. And yet, somehow, I had spent decades watching my achievements be measured against someone else's, as if my own life's worth was always relative. Then, as if on cue, the television flickered to life. A familiar real estate segment began to air, its bright graphics and smooth voiceover narrating the city's most coveted residences. I leaned forward, the subtle anticipation in my chest mingling with a strange, electric thrill. Coming up next, the top 5 properties under 30, 5 million. The announcer said, a smile audible even in his tone. I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smirk. I knew what was coming. The camera panned into my penthouse. Every corner, every design choice, every luxurious detail was displayed for the world to see. The way the sunlight spilled across the marble floors in the living room, the way the kitchen gleamed under custom lighting, the rooftop terrace with its view that seemed to stretch endlessly, it all screamed success. And finally, the voiceover concluded. An architectural masterpiece for those who demand both elegance and ingenuity. I sat back, letting the words wash over me like a tide of validation I had never asked for, yet had always deserved. Then the phone began to vibrate. 42 missed calls, a cascade of notifications flooding the screen. Most likely family, likely my mother first. Her voice somewhere between concern and excitement, and then my sister, whose tone I imagined would be both shocked and just a little smug before it turned to awe. I didn't answer. Each missed call was a note in a symphony I was composing in real time, a symphony of recognition, of validation, of subtle, quiet revenge. I didn't need to answer to know the impact. Their frantic curiosity, their need to reach me, was confirmation that the world had finally noticed what they had long dismissed. I remembered the countless times they had overlooked my achievements. The subtle comparisons, the faint but persistent belief that my sister's life was somehow more valuable, more impressive. Every time I had smiled politely at their compliments about her, my chest tightening with unspoken frustration, I had silently vowed that one day, they would see me not as the quieter shadow, but as someone impossible to ignore. And now they were. There was a strange sweetness in the silence as I watched the replay. I imagined the disbelief in my mother's eyes, the hesitation in my sister's voice when she realized this wasn't some exaggeration or temporary fortune. This was real. Every meticulous plan, every late night negotiation, every calculated choice had culminated in a moment they couldn't rewrite, couldn't erase, couldn't ignore. I allowed myself a slow, measured smile, one that didn't need words. I had always understood the power of patience, the power of letting life itself be the messenger. And now, finally, they were receiving the message. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with undeniable proof. I poured a glass of wine, savoring its warmth as it spread through me. I imagined the conversation that would inevitably come, the calls, the hesitant questions, the flustered attempts to explain why they had underestimated me. And yet, I would remain silent, savoring the anticipation, enjoying the delayed gratification of watching them, realize that the world I had built was entirely mine, entirely unassailable, entirely real. The city hummed outside, oblivious to my quiet triumph. And for the first time in years, I felt untouchable. Not in arrogance, but in a deep, unshakable confidence. The world had finally acknowledged what I had always known: my life, my choices, my success, my worth, needed no comparison. And tonight, they would feel it too. The phone continued to buzz silently on the table. The morning sun slanted through the panoramic windows of my penthouse, casting sharp lines across the polished floors. It was the same city that had always been a blur of noise and distraction. Yet now, from my elevated perch, it felt different, subdued, almost deferential. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth seep into me, savoring the calm before the storm I was about to orchestrate. The plan was simple, yet precise. I wouldn't confront them directly. I wouldn't boast or call attention to myself unnecessarily. I had learned long ago that the most satisfying victories were those that arrived quietly, unavoidable and undeniable. Invitations had been sent, disguised as casual notes from mutual acquaintances. Subtle hints that an intimate gathering would showcase something special. I knew my family would come, compelled by curiosity, by the social fear of missing out. And when they arrived, I would let them see, truly see, the life I had built with my own hands. Not to punish, but to illuminate the truth they had ignored for years. By mid-afternoon, the first messages began to trickle in. My mother's text was tentative, the kind that tried to mask anticipation as casual inquiry. "Are you having friends over? Maybe we could stop by later." My sister's was bolder, almost daring. "You're showing off again, aren't you?" I didn't respond. Not yet. Every detail had been curated for this moment. The living room gleamed under soft lighting, each object meticulously placed, a subtle testament to taste, intellect, and careful planning. The wine selection, the art on the walls, even the playlist humming softly in the background had been chosen to evoke admiration without a word. This was no mere display of wealth. It was a declaration of self, respect, a quiet but undeniable triumph. When they arrived, I let them linger in the entryway, letting their eyes adjust, letting the unspoken comparison settle like dust in the room. I watched from the sofa as my mother's gaze darted from one gleaming surface to another, lingering on corners she had once deemed excessive. I noticed the slight hesitation in my sister's step, the subtle way her confidence wavered as the reality of the space sank in. I offered polite, measured greetings, all calm smiles and soft acknowledgments, no gloating, no triumph in my tone. My silence was the loudest statement of all. I watched as their carefully constructed assumptions unraveled. The years of subtle favoritism, the comparisons, the quiet dismissals, they all seemed to weigh heavier in that moment. The conversation was light, polite, but every compliment, every inadvertent acknowledgement of my success, felt like a victory. "Your place is impressive," my mother admitted finally, her voice almost betraying the surprise she tried to hide. My sister, biting back a retort, nodded in agreement, though her eyes betrayed the frustration of realizing she had never truly measured up. I let it linger, the air thick with unspoken truths. I didn't need to say a word about years of being overlooked or underappreciated. I didn't need to recount past humiliations or comparisons. The reality of my life, the beauty and precision of my accomplishments, was itself a narrative, louder and clearer than anything I could ever articulate. As the evening wore on, I noticed a subtle shift in their demeanor. They were no longer the same people who had sent that careless text, who had brushed off my efforts as inconsequential. They were visitors in my world now, observers who could no longer ignore the life I had built. And in that quiet recognition, I felt a deep, resonant satisfaction. Yet beneath the satisfaction was something else, an unexpected clarity. Revenge, I realized, was never about cruelty. It was about acknowledgement, about reclaiming what was always yours. It was about showing the world, and yourself, that you were enough, without needing anyone else to validate it. By the time they left, their faces carried a mixture of admiration, hesitation, and something close to awe. And I, standing in the calm of my penthouse, realized that the sweetest revenge was never loud. The city was quiet that night, a blanket of light stretching endlessly beneath me. From my penthouse balcony, I could see the world moving without pause, oblivious to the small, personal victories that had unfolded behind these walls. And yet, for me, the silence felt profound, filled with the echoes of a battle long fought in whispers, subtle judgments, and overlooked achievements. When they arrived, the atmosphere was tense, almost fragile. My mother stepped cautiously into the space, her usual confidence tempered by something unspoken. My sister followed, her posture taut, the usual casual arrogance replaced by curiosity tinged with envy. They had been invited, of course, but on my terms, in my world, and they knew it. I greeted them with calm composure, a quiet smile that neither gushed nor concealed pride. There was no need for explanations, no need for defensiveness. Every element of this place spoke for itself. The gleaming floors, the curated art, the panoramic view that seemed to stretch endlessly. The subtle but undeniable evidence of a life meticulously earned. They lingered in the living room, their eyes darting from one detail to another. My mother's gaze softened for the first time in years, catching the intricate patterns in the furniture, the thoughtful arrangement of books and artifacts. My sister's eyes were sharper, scanning for flaws, perhaps trying to convince herself that this was luck or coincidence, rather than the outcome of years of calculated effort. I didn't speak immediately. Silence was the most powerful statement I could make. Every glance, every hesitant step they took, reinforced the truth I had long known. I had always been capable of this life. Of commanding attention without needing validation, of building a world that demanded recognition. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of realization. "It's beautiful," she admitted, as if saying it out loud made it real, even though she had already known it deep down. My sister nodded in reluctant agreement, her usual sharp retort caught in her throat. I sensed the subtle shift, the internal reckoning as they measured their assumptions against reality. But even as I savored the satisfaction, I felt an unexpected clarity. Revenge had never been about making them squirm or forcing acknowledgement. It was about reclaiming my own worth. About stepping fully into the life I had created and refusing to shrink for anyone else's comfort. Every past slight, every careless comparison, had been a challenge I could transform into strength, and in that realization, I felt something far deeper than triumph. I felt peace. I led them through the penthouse slowly, pointing out details with casual pride, never over-explaining, never lingering on the past. Their reactions were subtle but telling: awe, admiration, a touch of envy, and finally, acceptance. They were witnesses to what had been overlooked for years, and I let the truth settle quietly, like sunlight on polished stone. Later, after they had departed, leaving behind the faint scent of perfume and the echoes of hesitant praise, I stood alone in the living room. The city stretched below me, indifferent yet magnificent, and for the first time, I felt completely untethered from the expectations that had once defined me. The phone lay untouched on the table, a symbol of the validation I no longer needed, the voices I no longer had to answer. I poured a glass of wine, savoring the quiet, letting it fill the space where years of doubt and subtle betrayal had once resided. In the mirror of the city lights, I saw a reflection that was wholly mine, strong, confident, unshakable, and undeniably real. No one had given me permission to feel this way, and yet here I was, having claimed it for myself. Revenge had been sweet, yes, but its true power lay in transformation. It was not in their discomfort, their surprise, or their belated recognition. It was in the reclamation of my dignity, the quiet assertion of my worth, and the unshakable knowledge that I had always been more than they thought, more than they noticed, and more than they could ever define. I stepped onto the balcony, letting the night wind wash over me. The city shimmered, full of possibilities, indifferent yet infinite, and for the first time, I understood that the ultimate victory was not over them. It was over the part of myself that had ever doubted. And in that moment, alone in the quiet glow of my world, I smiled. Not with malice, not with bitterness, but with the serene, unassailable joy of someone who had finally claimed their life, their success, and their peace, on their own terms.